Welcome back to Blam Blam Truckers on Beas, that's Buse. Today we're talking about Sith Inquisitors and the Rule of Two. How could it possibly work out that if there can only be two Sith, there could be Sith Inquisitors? We're going to take a look at this chronologically, not from inside the Star Wars universe, but from when things were published. So the idea that there can only be two Sith, that the Rule of Two started by Darth Bane, and from that point on, there were only two Sith, a master and an apprentice. Do you know where that concept, I'm sure you know, you may not remember off the top of your head, but Buse, do you remember where that concept came, when that concept entered Star Wars lore from real time?
Wasn't that Phantom Menace?
That was Phantom Menace! What year did
Yes.
Phantom Menace come out?
Well, I believe it was a party year, because it was something about, tonight I want to party like it's 1999.
Tonight I wanna party like it's 1999. 1999. When did the first Star Wars movie come out? The first mention of Star Wars ever, really, introduced into popular culture.
That would be Star Wars: A New Hope.
Which was just called Star Wars at the time, which came out in the year of 1977, before either of us was born.
Jeez.
So from 1977 to 1999, there was no Rule of Two. George Lucas finalized a lot of stuff in the Lucas 6. It was when he did the last three movies, 1, 2, and 3, which were the last three movies he did in the Lucas 6. It was when he did those that he finalized a lot of stuff about the Jedi that we had never heard of before, that there was absolutely zero implication about, and that in books and EU stories that he personally approved contradicted. The decisions he made for the prequels contradicted things we heard and read about in pre-sequel extended universe stuff that Lucas approved. Now, he didn't approve everything in the EU era, but he did approve some books in particular, especially the Zahn trilogy, which he didn't only approve, but he also used the name. The name Coruscant comes from the Zahn trilogy. Timothy Zahn named Coruscant, which is pretty cool. Do you happen to know, Buse, when was the first time other dark side Force users was mentioned in Star Wars lore?
I feel like there was somebody mentioned in Splinter of the Mind's Eye.
Boom! Splinter of the Mind's Eye came out in 1978, the second Star Wars novel ever written, the first being the novelization of Star Wars. Written by the same guy who wrote the novelization of Star Wars, Alan Dean Foster. Splinter of the Mind's Eye mentions Dark Force adepts who continually probed the Force, searching for disturbances in the Force, a phrase taken directly from the first movie. And that was why Luke had to be careful with how he used the Force so he wouldn't be caught. That is the closest we get to Inquisitors at this time. But the idea that there was more than two Sith users, Sith out there, dark side users out there using the dark side of the Force, yeah, that's older than Empire, baby.
All I can say is the second Star Wars book is the first Legends book ever written.
The second piece of Star Wars media, arguably. Except for adaptations of Star Wars, because both the radio play and the novel adaptation and the storybooks, all of that are adaptations of the original movie. The first original piece of content after Star Wars was Splinter of the Mind's Eye, fully approved by Lucas, who read the whole thing. And there are dark side users in that besides Vader and the Emperor. So the idea of other dark side users is one of the original concepts of Star Wars. And during that period from 78 technically, all the way up to 99, we had plenty of examples of other dark side Force users, both adepts of the Sith and just dark Jedi who had gone wrong, and other people who have stumbled upon the Force in different ways. The EU had a lot of stories in it, eventually.
They didn't all work together in continuity, but they had a lot of stories in them.
That was actually one of the things I was happy about when Disney bought Star Wars. I'm like, this could be very, very good. They got rid of the EU, and I was the only Star Wars nerd who was like, this is a good thing. There's too many contradictions. They needed a reboot. Nobody was going to reboot it. They needed a reboot. Disney bought them. It's time for a reboot. Now, if they can keep the continuity, people are going to call this a new golden era of Star Wars. Well, I was right about them needing a reboot. Always look on the bright side of the Force. My pathetic whistling. So from 1978 we move forward. The next time we see a Dark Force user that I can personally remember, besides Vader, and we found out the Emperor used the dark side of the Force, but we didn't figure that out until Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
That was a closely guarded secret, though there's foreshadowing in
Empire.
Empire. You don't really see much of the Emperor. You only hear about the Emperor, once? Is he mentioned in A New Hope?
Yes.
When the Emperor has disbanded the Senate.
Yes, when the Emperor dissolved the Senate.
Has disbanded the Senate. Which is my Palpatine voice, but not my Moff Tarkin. But Tarkin ain't coming to me right now. We're Tarkin about Tarkin. So
you stole that from Swig.
I could have been, yeah. Swig is a great little Star Wars Facebook group that we're both part of, apparently.
You invited me.
Oh, yes. I invite you to all the Star Wars stuff I do. You come to some of them. Tarkin about Tarkin. From 78, the next one I can remember, and this isn't definitive, you can tell me how stupid and wrong I am down in the comments below. We welcome your comments, and I like criticism. The next one I can think of is Joris Kabath from the Zahn trilogy, which came out in 91, 92, and 93. But during that same time period, around 93, they put out some children's books that I never got around to reading, which included Triclops, the descendant, the claimed son of Palpatine.
Triclops or Trioculus?
Trioculus. What did I call him? Triclops?
Yeah.
Well, either way.
I've read some of these books, so... Because okay, sorry, not to interrupt. When I was younger...
It's our show. It's not just my show.
True. When I was younger, and I was...
When I was your age.
When I was a young Buse. Cephalus.
When he was a young Buse. Cephalus.
Very nice. Thanks.
I started running the West End Games Star Wars stuff for my friends. And I tried to get as much Star Wars stuff as I could. I want to say I read the Zahn trilogy, like either at a yard sale, flea market, used bookstore. I came across one of these books, and I'm like, oh, great. And I read it, and I'm like, oh, this, I guess, it's like, it was weird, the way that they described it. It was still talking about the rebellion, and I thought it should have been the New Republic, but it took place before the Zahn trilogy, so I'm like, okay, I'll accept it, whatever. Anything Star Wars I could get my hands on it, I would. I spent all of my allowance on various Star Wars books for the RPG and all that stuff. Other people were buying video games. I was dropping $25 to $50 on hardcover RPG books, or between 10 to 50.
All right, so Joris Kabath in the Zahn trilogy, and references other Dark Jedi in that. Then we get the kids' books, the 3 kids' books, including Trioculus, or whatever you pronounce his name, and the 3rd book is called Prophets of the Dark Side. Mm-hmm. So it was about the Prophets of the Dark Side, this cabal of dark side users, and the lesser dark side users. They weren't as powerful as Vader or the Emperor. All right. I've read about it. I haven't read it. So there were other dark side users who may or may not have been Sith. The whole legacy of the Sith hadn't really been invented yet. It was a mythos that was growing. The word Sith is not actually in the original movie, though it is in the extended cut, which got me confused. I lost a point in trivia at the bar one time because of that. I'm serious. I did. I was very annoyed, and then I went home and watched it, and I found the quote, and I'm like, this is part of the extended scenes. I'm so stupid. It was mentioned in the that was also from UHF. It was mentioned in the novelization. The scene was in the novelization. And it is in the novelization, so that's 93. We see a lot more. The growth of the EU really exploded between 1991 and 1998, 1999, which is only 8 years, but such a rich period to be a Star Wars fan, if you could read. Amazing video games. It was the height of LucasArts, really. It's just a great time. And going back, I highly recommend any of you truckers out there who love Star Wars and are new to it, go back and read that stuff. Go back and play those video games. Some of them are a little rough to get into, like Dark Forces 1, because the controls really need to be modded to be up to the current standard of first-person shooter. But good stories, interesting, lots of contradictions. Then, speaking of video games, we had Dark Forces 2 Jedi Knight, which came out in, 97? I think, right around 97.
I think so, yeah.
And it was in Dark Forces 2 Jedi Knight that we got, he had to fight 7 or 8 different Sith or Dark Jedi.
That's like Jarek and all those, right?
Oh, yeah. Some of which made it into some of the EU, some of the other EU books. But that story contradicts some other stories, and that's the way it went with Star Wars. So there are lots of Dark Force users. When the whole idea of a Sith Inquisitor, that idea really starts with the dark side cabal from both Splinter of the Mind's Eye and then leading into the Prophets of the Dark Side. But we see the next time we see the idea really implemented, and the whole concept of an Inquisitor goes to the comic books from Dark Horse Comics, which completely ignore the rest of the continuity. But in the golden age of the Jedi series, we see lots of Sith running around. I'm not sure if we get Inquisitors, because I didn't play KOTOR all the way through. I didn't have it, and I didn't actually get the game until much later because I didn't have an Xbox, and it was an Xbox exclusive for many a year. And I didn't have the money to buy it, so yeah. I don't know if we got Inquisitors in that, but the next time, go ahead. No,
I played KOTOR 1 and 2. There were no Inquisitors in that because it was Old Republic, and they weren't. It was just it was the Sith Empire or whatever, but it was run literally by 2 Sith. So,
so we may have had a few in the books. I don't remember off the top of my head, but the next time I remember the actual term Inquisitor or Sith Inquisitor coming up was in Star Wars: The Old Republic, the MMO. Massively multiplayer online role-playing game, which is a lot of fun. I recommend giving it a shot. You can play through the stories on free-to-play mode. Great stories, good game. And that's when we see Sith Inquisitors again. But this is again before the Rule of Two, as they continued to modify the. It was after 1999, so it was after Phantom Menace.
Yeah, so it was after the Rule of Two, but it was in
story, in world.
Yeah.
In the setting, it's set before the Rule of Two. It was a lot of fun playing that game. It was an interesting story. I don't consider video games to be part of A canon, because I take the A canon, B canon, and C canon from Star Trek and apply it to almost everything because it's a beautiful system. But it was good stuff. So we don't get Sith Inquisitors back into canon outside of video games, back into media until Rebels, Star Wars Rebels. And the story that they put out kind of in a whisper campaign, this wasn't official. So while this is going on, towards the end of the EU, before Disney buys Star Wars, we came up with how Jedi become Jedi and what happens if you don't pass the trials. If you don't pass the trials and become a Jedi Knight, then you join the Jedi Service Corps. And there were 4 branches: the Explorers, the Agriculture Corps, the Diplomatic Corps, and I guess the Medical Corps. I can't remember off the top of my head. I know the first 3 are right. I can't remember what the 4th one is off the top of my head. Are you looking it up, Buse?
I was looking up.
All right.
I was fact checking you. I'm sorry.
That's fine. Fact check away. So this was never official, but it was the Jedi who were in the Service Corps who never made Jedi Knight, who never passed the trials, which is the majority of the Jedi Order, by the way, according to, EU that's been by Disney. It was the members of the Jedi Service Corps who were captured by Palpatine and Vader, and given the opportunity to either join their cause as Sith Inquisitors or die. And the vast majority of them chose death. And that was, before Rebels, that was the explanation for where the Jedi I'm sorry, where the Sith Inquisitors came from, because we started seeing Sith Inquisitors a little bit here and there in the EU, and the whole concept of them. The only other Sith we had that were officially 100% Sith were the two apprentices of Darth Vader in the current timeline, in the movie timeline, not way back in the past or way in the future. The only Sith we had were the two apprentices of Darth Vader who were not called Sith, who were in the book Crystal Star, which most people don't consider canon for a lot of reasons. Read the book and you'll understand why. It was more of a fantasy novel than a sci-fi novel.
I think I only read it once.
Oh,
It was
that
fairly
was probably
forgettable.
one too many times.
But yeah, well, I mean, I remember the Inquisitors being mentioned in the RPG materials a few times. Going into the West End game stuff, one of the things West End Games wanted to do, it's a game, but it's taking place in the Star Wars universe, so you're not going to be Luke Skywalker.
No.
You're
You'd
not
be Luke
Han Solo.
Groundrunner.
Exactly. Or my first character, An Molo. And,
Really?
and yes, but Inquisitors in that were introduced because were done for the simple reason of you don't want Darth Vader hunting you.
Nope.
But if you're a Force user, they want to be able to give you a challenge, and it wants to feel like somebody is hunting you.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, you create, like, you know, the GM could create these lower level Force users who had lightsabers and skills, but weren't on the level of the people in the movies to chase after you. And I've got to say, the Star Wars adventure guides, remember those books?
Oh, yeah.
I've got a couple of them. Like, there was like a nice story about a former Sith Inquisitor and like a Force using character. She sought him out to train her because she couldn't find anyone to train her, and he had retired, and she was hoping that. Yeah, but anyways,
Cam from originally he was in the comics, but then he was brought into the Jedi Academy trilogy. Cam was a Sith Inquisitor. Yeah, Salazar.
I liked him in. I read the Jedi Academy trilogy afterwards. I read iJedi first, and I loved Cam in iJedi.
Well, that wasn't Aaron Alston. That was
Stackpole.
Michael Stackpole. Good writer. Very good writer. Yep. Highly recommended.
He worked a lot with Timothy Zahn to help. They were friends and they helped each other with their Star Wars stuff. They would introduce characters for each other and stuff like that. It was great.
And they looked over each other's work. Some of the best written stuff Stackpole did were chapters that Zahn would look over for him, and vice versa. Frankly, Zahn's use of Stackpole's characters in Spectre of the Past and Vision of the Future are really well done. And that's because Stackpole was right there making sure he got the characters right.
And Zahn created Booster Tarek. That's all I got to say. He was a minor character. The introduction story for Thrawn, which was not his first appearance, but the introduction story for Thrawn, a little Thrawn prequel that Timothy Zahn wrote for Star Wars Adventures, was the first introduction of Booster Tarek. It was before X-Wing series came out. I think it may not have been written before the X-Wing series was written, but it came out before it came out. So.
You know, we're appealing to a very small audience if we're talking about the history of Booster Tarek.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Nothing to be sorry about. I love it.
Yeah, read the EU, people. Read the EU.
Some of it was so good, so amazingly good. So that's where the Sith Inquisitors come from. That's a brief history through our poor recollection. I didn't even bring up West End games. I wasn't even thinking of that while we were doing this. I'm glad you did.
Well, that's where I first heard the term Inquisitor was in the West End game stuff. Yeah,
that's brilliant.
Another thing West End did, and this is a tangent which I may or may not cut out, but they introduced a couple of extra bounty hunters and specifically the bounty hunter character of Jodo Cast.
Jodo
who-
Cast, baby. The second
who-
Mandalorian. Where's my buddy here?
Except he wasn't originally supposed to be a Mandalorian. He was a Boba Fett copycat. And
Yep.
they specifically created him. Peter Schweighöfer said that he was specifically created because, again, just like you don't want Darth Vader coming after you, you don't want Boba Fett coming after you. So Jodo Cast had armor that was weaker than Boba Fett's, skills that were less than Boba Fett, so he would be a challenge. But it's not like the same level of. You don't need to be Han Solo and Luke Skywalker and stuff like that to take him on. A team of adventurers could defend themselves against him, possibly defeat him, because you don't want to kill Boba Fett in your game, probably, if you want to keep it within the Star Wars world. Eventually, Jodo Cast got his, just
Bare
like
minimum. Bare minimum, you want to save Boba Fett for much later in the adventure.
Yeah. It's also something that you could do as a GM, bring in someone, because everybody knows what Boba Fett looks like. So you bring in someone that looks like Boba Fett to the characters, it's also going to cause them to react differently. If they don't hear a name, it lets them react differently. West End Games was very big on story. It was great.
Yeah, they did a great job. Also, if you had the toys from Kenner back in the day, because the Power of the Force toys didn't come out before the West End Games started making their stuff, you could use those in your RPG. But getting back to Sith Inquisitors,
Yes.
and awesome segue, by the way.
Thank you.
The next time we see them is in Rebels, and once we see them in Rebels, they're all failed Jedi or some form of youngling, Padawan, whatever you want to call them, who were turned by Vader or the Emperor.
And I will add in this.
Okay.
According to Wikipedia, at least, Star Wars Rebels is the first canon appearance of Inquisitors.
Well, it would have to be, because it was brought in, it was one of the only things kept as canon when Disney bought the franchise. When they bought the IP, they said the only thing that counts anymore are the 6 movies, even though there were more than 6 movies at that point, because, hey, Ewok Adventure counts. It was released in theaters. And no, it wasn't. It was released on TV. Still counts. It was a movie made by Lucasfilm. And, sorry. And so there was
6 movies, the Clone Wars CGI series.
And this Clone Wars CGI movie and Rebels.
Right. Yeah, movie and series.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not the cartoon, even though they brought even though some stuff from the cartoon was brought over and
like
even
General
referenced. And Asajj Ventress.
Yeah.
I mean, Grievous was at least in the movie. Was at least in the movies. But.
So this is the first current canon mention of the Sith Inquisitors, but Sith Inquisitors and other Darkside users have been a part of Star Wars canon from not quite the very beginning, but 1 year after the very beginning. It's been something we've, especially with the role-playing game, and those of us who, the role-playing game was the only thing that kept Star Wars alive from 1985 to 1991. Could have been 1986, could have been 1987. I forget when the last Lando book was published, but it was a role-playing game that kept people, that nerds like us got into and bought, books. I would go into game stores and read them, but I was still a kid growing up at that point. So the Marvel comic stopped being published after Return of the Jedi. Not too long after Return of the Jedi, but after Return of the Jedi. And then you had this the original Han Solo trilogy by Brian Daley, I think, or did he write the Lando books? Doesn't matter. So you had 3 Lando books, 3 Han Solo books. It all ended around 86, 87. The toys stopped being made. And for the next 5 years or so, 5-6 years, we didn't have anything until 1991, and Heir to the Empire came out, except for West End and what they were doing with D6 stuff. And throughout that entire period, we had Dark Side users that entire time. It's not something Disney came up with, because again, if you do say that the Sith Inquisitors were first referenced in Rebels, well, Rebels was created by George Lucas, baby. So, yeah.
Rebels wasn't George Lucas.
It wasn't?
That was after. No, Rebels was after it was already sold to Disney.
I thought George Lucas, time to go to the internet and see how wrong I am this time.
Where Rebels was post-Disney. Came out in 2014.
Ooh, I think you're right. Yep, 2014. And when did...
Now, Clone Wars, that was still a Lucas thing.
Give me 1 second here. When did Disney buy Star Wars? I'm almost certain you're right. 2012. You were right. I was wrong. Alas.
I was much
dagger
more
to my heart.
I was
What?
much more personally hurt by Disney buying Star Wars than Beas
I thought
was.
I thought it was the greatest thing that had happened to Star Wars in 10 years. I was hoping. I didn't think it was. I was hoping it was going to be.
As I said, these discussions we have on air are the same
Yeah.
type of discussions we've had over the years.
Because I said, look, Disney does not care what you do with your IP as long as it continues to make a profit. They don't interfere unless it stops making a profit. And I was right about that. As long as Star Wars was making a profit, they let them do whatever they wanted. They had no care about what Lucasfilm still did, as long as it was making a profit. When it stopped making a profit is when Disney started to interfere with brand. I just didn't realize that the people running Lucasfilm, I didn't know at the time in 2012 that they weren't going to continue Lucas's legacy in a way that Lucas himself would approve of. Is that fair?
Yeah.
All right. Hopefully that's positive enough for you guys. I don't want to slam Lucasfilm. Everybody's taking shots. It's really easy to hit somebody when they're down. I'd like to see them get back up again. I'd love to see another great Star Wars movie. I don't see one on the horizon, even though Mandalorian and Grogu is going to be coming out next year, theoretically.
I don't know if I'll see it in the theater, but
I can bring you in warm, or I can bring you in cold.
I do plan on watching it because I enjoyed the series.
An Acolyte is going to be coming out this year.
I don't know if I'm going to really watch it, even though I think Daphne Keane was one of the greatest breakout actresses that I've seen in any recent movies.
What was she in?
Logan. She was X-23 in Logan. She's
I should probably
older
watch
now.
that one of these days. I
You
would
still
hope
haven't
so. If she's not older, then she's dead. So I really hope she's older now. I'm older than when we first started this podcast. So there you go. So are you, for that matter.
Oh, yeah. From when we
Carrie-Anne
first
Moss.
started this podcast tonight? Or
Yeah. 32 minutes ago. Carrie-Anne Moss, I've enjoyed her ever since I found out about her in The Matrix. That's right, I was not looking for Carrie-Anne Moss because I had no idea who she was before she played Trinity. Very good actress.
I enjoyed her in the MCU stuff from Netflix. She was good in that too.
I thought I didn't necessarily enjoy everything she was in as much as I enjoy. She always gives a good performance. Carrie-Anne Moss, I've never seen her give a bad one. That doesn't mean that I'm going to enjoy the show that she's in, but yeah. Jessica Jones was not my favorite. It wasn't that bad. It just wasn't my cup of tea. And that's fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, truckers. If you don't enjoy something, don't watch it. But if you do enjoy something, watch it.
Oops. We've talked about this before. We can respect the actors, we can respect the story, we can respect the writing, the set design, the effects and everything, and still just not necessarily like something.
Yeah. I watched the first 2 seasons of Jessica Jones. I started the third one, couldn't finish it. I thought the second one was better, but it was just a little too depressing for me. It was a very dark... The bits of hope in the first season were few and far between. Not that she didn't have agency, she just... Fighting somebody like Kilgrave is a rough fight. And we're completely off topic and way over time.
Yep.
My main point was Darkside users have been part of Star Wars since 78. The idea that it was only the rule of 2 was something Lucas changed and didn't bother telling anyone before he changed it, which is his prerogative, it's his story, but it's a collaborative story. Like, that's not even a slap to the fans, which it was to some degree, because I've been reading, you've been reading, we've been reading all these EU stories, and you're just going to say, none of that actually happened. There's a rule of two now. None of that
And
actually happens. Jedi couldn't marry.
Mary. Yep.
None of that actually happened because, and all the EU, by the way, got canceled by Revenge of the Sith, because it turns out when Jedi become immortal ghost guardian hamster people, whatever you want to call them,
Mhm.
they stick around and you can talk to them, and they still have influence on the world, which, and it may only be in an advisory capacity and an information gathering capacity, but it would have been enough that Luke rebuilding the Jedi Order would have been a snap, because when he had a question, Yoda's right there. Ben Kenobi is right there. Anakin Skywalker is right there. What's his name? Qui-Gon. Qui-Gon is right there. And
And-
possibly everybody's favorite Jedi, Mace Windu, could have been right there.
I don't know if Mace Windu had learned how to do it, though.
I don't know. That's
But
why I said
I
theoretically.
will say this. Disney did get that right, though. Disney did
They
get
did.
that right, because we had Yoda in Last Jedi.
Well, I even said as a Star Wars theory, that
That's another channel.
after seeing what?
That's another channel.
That is another channel. It's a good channel. I don't watch it much anymore. Didn't watch it much all the time, but I do enjoy every once in a while. I do enjoy. There's only so many hours in the day, folks, and I'm glad you choose
Yep.
to spend some time with us. After watching The Force Awakens and that whole scene where Rey, who had zero training, defeats Ben Solo, who had lots of training, I'm like, the only way that could actually make sense in continuity is if she doesn't know it, but she has all of the Jedi Immortals around her, or Force Ghosts, whatever you want to call them. She has all of the Ascended Masters around her, guiding her through this fight, and she just doesn't know it. So I was hoping to see in the next movie, which of course didn't happen, I was hoping to see in the next movie that scene again, but from the perspective of someone who could see Jedi Force Ghosts. And so you're seeing, Anakin's right there next to Ben, because he's been next to Ben this entire time, going, oh. And when they're in the fight against Rey, like, he's starting to do his sword, and you'll see the Force ghosts doing little things like moving his hand just slightly. Not big impact, but a little bit of impact. Moving his hand just slightly. Pushing Rey out of the way of the sword. Getting her sword aligned just right. I thought that would be a brilliant way to show it wasn't her yet, that she had room to grow. The reason why she was so great at everything is because she had guardian angels basically looking over her shoulder, or the equivalent thereof in Star Wars.
And it
I
would
thought
have
that would be
made,
a great scene.
and that would have been great, and it would have made a nice transposition, opposite, whatever,
I don't know.
from when Finn was fighting, because Finn was actually a trained soldier, so it would make sense when he had been fighting with the lightsaber that he was relying on his training. I mean, he didn't do great, but he didn't do poorly. It's not like if a regular person had picked it up, because he was a soldier, and we saw him fight with it against the
Super
Stormtrooper.
Super Dance Stormtrooper. That was actually a really fun scene. I'm making fun of it because I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I enjoyed
Super
Force
Dance
Awakens when I first watched it.
Yeah. It all depended on what came next, really, how good that movie would be.
But it would, but your idea would have been great if we could have seen that and then almost compared the two, because it would have been someone relying upon their own skill as opposed to someone relying on the Force, and it would have kind of taken out somewhat of a Mary Sue argument for Rey.
And you could have had the conversation with, well, why didn't you help Finn? He wasn't open to listening to us. Or even if they were just saying things like dodge or shouting in Ben's ear. Even if we didn't give him more agency than just being able to communicate, they could have been shouting and screaming at Ben, "You're doing it wrong. I disapprove of you. This is not how I want my grandson to act." Whatever. But anyway, getting back to, I think we're going to do my appeal to David Zaslav, and we can call it. How's that sound to you?
It sounds
I
like a plan.
enjoy doing these. I think people like our banter.
Yes.
Or I think they would if they ever saw it. So
I don't cut it all out. I only cut occasional stuff out when we really.
and you zip us. I like how he zips us forward a little bit, like because we have to pause and actually think about what we're going to say before we say it. Because we do. We're not,
This
we
is
don't
not
sit
scripted.
down and. It's not only not scripted. We don't memorize our lines. We don't have time for that sort of thing if it was scripted. But we have an idea of what we want to talk about before we get started. So, anybody out there over at Warner Brothers, Time Warner Discovery, whatever you want to call it these days, like David says, love, but I doubt he'd actually listen because he's got people that he pays to do that for him, who wants to hear a movie pitch for specifically their superhero genre of DC. I have some great ideas for that. I have a lot of other ideas of pretty much any genre you can think of. And I'd love to pitch a movie or 15 to you guys. So if you know somebody, have them contact us through the YouTube, through the direct channel under the YouTube, or we're on Facebook and we're on Instagram, but we don't check Instagram very often.
And if anybody wants to buy me a pizza, please write a comment below. And
his Venmo number is.
And as we've said before many times, if you have made it all the way to the end of this episode, we appreciate you. If you liked this, please hit the like button. If you liked this and want more of it, hit subscribe.
Subscribe.
If you don't like it,
subscribe. And hit the bell. Subscribe.
But hit the bell if you want to get more. And if you disliked it, hey, completely respect it. Like we said,
thanks for
we don't always like everything either. Hit the dislike button, but give us a comment below.
Tell us how stupid we are.
Yeah. Or just tell us what you think we could improve. We may do it, we may not.
Yeah.
But we listen to feedback. So
subjects you want us to cover. Bad impressions you want me to do. I can do a mean Mickey Mouse. Ha! Oh boy! Oh me! Oh my!
But after all that, I'll just say, we'll see you, truckers.
Keep on trucking.